You're listening to Crushing Club Marketing, a podcast for progressive club leaders looking to increase their club's revenue. Time for change begins right now. As the old saying goes, the one thing leaders need are followers. Well, Dr. Sue Tinnish would take that one step further and say great leaders need great followers. But what does that mean, and how can a leader develop great followers? Dr. Tinnish is an executive coach with a PhD in organization development. She also works with leaders regularly in her role as a Vistage chair. In this episode, we're going to dive into the idea of great leadership and followership. Well, thanks for joining us. I can't think of a business in the world that doesn't want to attract and retain the very best talent possible. Hiring outstanding people is really, really hard, and keeping them can be even harder, especially if there are management or leadership issues. If you're a leader who's trying to figure out how to inspire your team, or maybe elevate those around you, or maybe you're trying to get more out of the team that you have, you may need to take a look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself, am I my own worst enemy? Now, it's hard to do that, right? Because we don't always see our flaws and growth areas. In fact, we'd rather not think of those. But there's a group of people who do. They see all your flaws and growth areas. It's your employees or maybe your direct reports. The question is, do you have the kind of people who will tell you when you get off the rails? Do they help you help yourself? If they do, you may have great followers. And they are the people who can help you become an even greater leader. Dr. Tinnish has presented nationally on this topic and works with leaders every day as a consultant. And we're really fortunate to have her here with us today to talk more about great leaders and great followers. Sue, thanks so much for being with us today.
Delighted to be here. Thanks, Ed.
Man, you've done so much great work in, not just in corporate America, but in academia, around leadership, you have a PhD in organization development. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about your background and how it's led to where you are today?
Sure. I think it's really a combination of being a lifelong learner and being curious and always wanting to improve myself and do different things, as well as just a little bit of serendipity and being open to the possibilities. And I think that's important to keep in mind when anyone's thinking about their own career. But fortunately, I've had the opportunity to work in and thrive and succeed, and in many cases lead a variety of different organizations. I started my career in corporate banking. I've been an entrepreneur. I was lured into academia to start teaching, and then I became a college dean. I've also worked for 2 family-run businesses in my career. And so it's always been really just an opportunity to continue to grow and change and really leverage what I did in past experiences going forward into the future. So I think I have a really fun and interesting blend of soft and hard skills. I went to school, undergrad in communications. I got an MBA in finance and marketing. And then, as you said, I completed my PhD focusing really on people, culture, training, leadership. And so I feel like I have a very full circle of skills and interests that's that good blend between hard and soft skills.
That's so cool. I mean, it's, just the whole idea of being curious and where it's led you through your career. And one of the stops was the dean of the School of Hospitality Management as well. And you've spent part of your career in hospitality. And through the years, what have you learned about, you think about organization development and the hospitality industry. What are some of the key learnings that you picked up through the years? And maybe more specifically, how the organizations are structured and where leaders and followers fit in within that structure?
Well, it's an amazing industry. It's a very fun industry, and it's attractive for many reasons, but it also has a lot of downsides. There's a lot of long hours. It tends to be not as well respected sometimes, and so that also leads sometimes to a perception of lower wages. So it can be a little challenging, but there are a lot of rewards. I think as a sector, the industry lags a little bit behind in terms of being progressive. And that translates into leadership issues, which also affects followers, people that follow the leaders. And some of those examples, I think, are really just around training and development and helping improve employees and the focus on employees. I think we all realize that, especially nowadays, there's like less loyalty to organizations, but that's always been true in the hospitality industry. And so people tended to leave jobs for, an extra quarter or new opportunities. And so, especially related around economics. And so it makes it challenging for an organization and a leader to say, well, I want to invest in my people and my team through training and development or coaching or whatever, because people are going to leave. But then people do leave. And so it's kind of a chicken and egg situation in my mind. I mean, many other industries have realized that when you invest in culture, when you create, especially nowadays for the younger generations, when you create an organization that's differentiated in terms of its culture and offers people meaning and purpose, as well as continued opportunity, that those people will stay. And there's been a lot of real interesting metrics, I mean, actual data that says when you invest in culture and invest in people, they will stay, and it increases employee engagement. And more importantly, it decreases turnover. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges. And then, you have, as a discipline, hospitality as a discipline is, relatively new. And I say that more as like an academic, like anything less than, 50 years old is, like relatively new. And so you have people now, studying in hospitality, and as the younger generation graduates and goes into jobs, their expectations for what they want out of organizations and out of a job are more pronounced. I don't necessarily think that they're totally different, because we all, we're all seeking sort of meaning in our work, and it's much more fun to have, a job that you look forward to going to, instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to work.
It's so interesting you say that. One of the things that we've talked about here is the fact that millennials are really no different than, I mean, there's no difference. It's just they, what us older people, we would suppress a lot of our thoughts around things, but they'll say it. They'll say, I want time off. I want these things. I want flexible hours. I want, so it's like, but we all want the same thing, like what you said there. What I'm wondering, though, is that as that candidate pool changes and has changed, as far as the people that are coming into the workforce, they are getting younger, as we know. Some of the leaders, or maybe the leadership style, hasn't changed to adapt, and it's not so much like a younger leader. It's just, is it more just an adaptation of leadership change, or have we just become more aware of how to become better leaders? What do you know what I mean?
I do. I think traditionally we've been perceived as organizations that are command and control. So a very sort of military perspective on how we lead, and that style has needed to adapt, whether you call it, servant leadership or authentic leadership, or whatever terminology you use, it needs to adapt. And it's not just that the style is out of vogue, because sometimes there can be, sort of buzzwords in the leadership world. It's not really just a buzzword change. It's just that I think organizations have changed. I mean, like, just think about the hospitality industry. And so there's been so much more consolidation. And so you have much, much larger organizations. The organizations are global. Technology obviously has changed every aspect of industry, including the hospitality industry. And so what happens now is the organizations and the problems that we're solving are much more complex. And so I think more traditionally, you could have a leader who would say, he or she, most likely he, oh, I in my vast experience know the right answer, and we are going to go this direction. But because of this complexity in the world and the organization, the global nature, the fact that we have to collaborate and cooperate with so many more people, it's just this concept of sort of stakeholders, so many more stakeholders. I think it's less easy for one person to possess all the knowledge to lead an organization. And so that means you cannot be a command and control. You have to be more collaborative, and you have to engage more people to solve these more complex, nuanced issues in our organizations. So I think that fundamentally is why people need to realize that they have to change.
in an industry like in the private club industry, and maybe across hospitality altogether, and you would know that better than I would, but for sure in the private club industry, is it's becoming more competitive as the prospective member pool tightens up and operations have to get better, the facilities have to get better. And to your point, retaining employees is key because it costs money to hire new people, it takes time to get the right people. And so that strong leadership is such a critical part of running a dynamic club today, right? I mean, and yet you talk about this whole idea of leaders getting derailed. When you talk about leaders getting derailed, I mean, I'm assuming there's some leaders that maybe just don't have clear vision to begin with, and then there are others who do, and then somehow become, they lose their way. But when you think about leadership derailment, what does that mean?
Well, I think we could all get derailed. The idea is to sort of get back on the tracks quickly. And the way leaders can get derailed and become less effective, I think, is because, first of all, as you get higher and higher in an organization, your knowledge about what's happening below you becomes dated and you're just not as in touch with things. I think, a second thing is there's actually been studies that indicate that your self-awareness and what is called emotional intelligence really starts to decline. I mean, you believe you've been successful, it kind of feeds your ego. And that sometimes makes people just a little too big for their britches, as my grandma would say.
So as their ego inflates, their self-talk becomes, I don't need to listen to other people. I don't need, is that part of that?
Yeah, exactly. Success is good, but it also can feed us to a point of thinking that we're maybe a little less, that we are infallible, that we don't necessarily have blind spots or spots where we need help. I think the other thing that happens, and I've experienced this both as a leader and I've also done it as an employee, is no one likes to be, when your manager, your boss, your leader asks you a question, you're always going to give them the truth, but it's going to be a truth, a little bit of a spin that filters out maybe some of the bad stuff and highlights some of the good stuff. So leaders in general tend to get filtered feedback and filtered information. So they're hearing partial truths about the organization. And that can cause a leader to be just in a position where they don't have access to all the information that they really need. And that can cause them to derail. And then, just each of us as a person, myself, all of us, we all have these blind spots, just areas where we just don't necessarily realize that this aspect of our personality, our behavior, or our beliefs could potentially derail us as a leader.
Mm-hmm. In that way, the blind spots, I mean, gosh, there's so many different blind spots, and we can dive into some of those. But I want to go back to what you're talking about with, that people don't like to tell their boss bad news. And yet, aren't there some bosses out there, Sue, that are like, don't disagree with me. They want to have their ego stroked. They want other people to tell them right because they feed off of that, even if it means that they're going in the wrong direction. At least they're going to go in the wrong direction with people that they believe think like them. And what's the difference between that leader and the leader who goes, no, I need you to tell me. I need you to go, hey, buddy, you're not going down a path that I'd recommend. Like some leaders, I always think of them as the stronger leaders are the ones who invite that and say, hey, I need this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Ed, you asked me what's the differentiator?
I mean,
well, the difference
security,
is between a bad leader and a good leader.
confidence, right? Yeah.
Well, I don't think we've always, think about it, like throughout school and throughout our childhood, we're always trained, to sort of value the prize. And there's not a lot of situations where I think we're taught to receive feedback as a gift. It's interesting, I actually lead a peer group of CEOs. And so as we're giving each other feedback, which is what a peer group can do, people will often, it's just a natural human tendency, but I want to explain myself,
Right.
And the reality is we haven't been trained to think about it as a gift. And so, I always coach people, when you get a piece of feedback, you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to believe it. You don't have to do anything except just accept it and think about it. And then it's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. And that's really sort of more personal feedback. But as it relates to even offering different opinions or different viewpoints, I mean, that is really the linchpin of coming up with the most creative solutions and the best solutions. And so often we don't want to hear, we have bias against wanting to hear information that disagrees with us. But the reality is that the smartest people are going to assemble the most diverse teams and encourage the most diversity of opinion and perspective, because that only makes the solution better. It kind of goes back to the lessons of improv. When something happens in improv, they always say you never say but, you say and. You take what you're given and you build on it. And so, how can we take various points of view and build on that to create something that is possibly innovative or just, it's a better solution? And so that's why that kind of differing opinion and that ability to see things from different perspectives is so important in terms of both managing and thinking about your own leadership style, but also managing the problems and challenges and opportunities that we face, whether in a private club, another aspect of hospitality, or a completely other organization.
I will admit I was that guy for a long time that didn't want to solicit people's opinions because it was an insecurity. What if they have something better than me, and then they won't think that I'm a good leader and that I know what I'm doing? And what I found, at least, is when you open that door and you say, hey, I don't have all the answers. One of my favorite lines is, none of us is smarter than all of us. And
Right.
it's incredible the ideas that you can develop and generate. That I look at it now, Sue, and I'm like, I could never have thought of that myself. I mean, these people and their perspective and what they see is just so unique and different and helpful. It's you always get a better result. And yet, it seems like it's also important for leaders to recognize the fact that followers or the people that they're leading, followers is feel more valued, right? I mean, when they're asked for their perspective, now they feel like they have a stake in it as well. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I just came off of presenting at the PCMA annual conference, and that was actually my topic, was on leadership and followership. And great leaders also create what I would like to call, like star followers, great followers. And that may mean that you're coaching and developing people to potentially take your job or to move out of the organization. But when you have great followers, it is a reflection on you and your leadership style. And you're going to have people that are going to stay with the organization, and they're just going to be better employees.
Can we dive into the star followers a little bit more? Because I think that's it's just that whole concept is very, I've never heard the idea of becoming a star follower, but that idea of understanding, I used to refer to it, Sue, as managing up sometimes. And I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's the same thing, but when you think about the star followers, why just talk more about them? I mean, like, why is that important? What if I'm working at a club and I'm maybe an assistant GM, or
Right.
I am maybe at the head of a department, I run the rackets, or director of racket sports or something like that, and I need to and I want to become a star follower. What does that look like?
Well, we touched on the first thing, and that is, I think that you want to, as a leader, you want to welcome challenging questions, and you want to encourage people to disagree with you respectfully, but disagree with you, bring up points of view, and help make solutions stronger and more innovative because of that. So, first of all, I'd say it's that welcoming challenging questions, whether it's to a specific problem or even to a leadership style. So, it's about welcoming feedback. And when I think about managing and leading, I think it's people really want to understand the why. So explaining why they're doing things and not getting so tied up as a leader in telling them how to do things, just explaining what they need to do, what's the desired outcome, and allowing them some latitude to execute the task in the way that they see fit. So it's really about delegating. And that's important to the millennial generation, and understanding why and then just kind of letting them go is really good. I think it's also recognizing the strengths and weaknesses on your team. And there's a variety of ways to do that kind of assessment. You can do it yourself or there's other tools, but really thinking through your team almost as a portfolio so that you can see their strengths and weaknesses, and then just utilizing that expertise within the team. For a long time in human resource management, we always were focused on, like focusing on people's weaknesses and how can we make you better in this way. And now really the thought process is more about leaning into people's strengths, especially as you get people that are a little more senior in their role. The reality is they're never going to get better in terms of making the ability for them to make their weaknesses less weak is smaller than their ability to make their strengths even stronger. So what you want to do is focus on people's strengths and utilize that within your team. And I think it's important that you also lead by example. You have to walk the talk. And when you do all of those things, you have the opportunity to share credit with the entire team. And that, of course, makes people really feel good. And it's just an opportunity to create what I like to call as, star followers, people that are going to be engaged with you, but also be analytical. So you have good relationships, but you also get good feedback from them.
So, and when you're doing these things as a leader, like you said, you're engaging them and it makes them feel like it's a safe environment for them to speak up a little bit more and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for someone who is maybe listening and going, well, I love my job. I love where I work. I love what I do. I don't want to leave. I just want to, gosh, my GM could just work on a couple things in his communication style or approach. And maybe you're a person who has seen people leave because of certain things that the leadership of the club does or things like that. To be a star follower in that way, what would you recommend that person do as far as like helping that leader understand and acknowledge their blind spot?
Well, first of all, it takes courage, especially if the leader hasn't historically been open to a lot of feedback. And I think when giving feedback to peers as well as to people above me, the place that I always like to start is saying something like, I have a couple observations and I want to know if you're open to my feedback or not. So posing that question, I mean, first of all, people are unlikely to say, no, I don't want to hear what you have to say. But there's a mental shift in terms of, yes, I'm welcoming your feedback. I've given you permission to say something to me. And so it's had a little shift psychologically that puts people perhaps in a slightly more receptive way. And so then I think when you give the feedback, it's important to be direct and it's important to be factual. And it's important to even when you're kind of managing up to sort of set the context. Like, I really enjoy working in, this organization, in this club. There's so many things that are great. And I'm not sure that you're aware of the impact that you have on employees. And if you're open to it, I'd like to share some of my observations with you. Is that okay? Yes. And then to be factual about what happened and to focus not on blame, but sharing facts and sort of sharing your response to what happened. So when you said this in the meeting, this is how I reacted, and I feel like other people around me reacted that way, and I don't think that was your intent, but here's the impact of it. And it's important wherever you're giving feedback is to always give it as quickly as possible when it's close to the time. So whether you're a leader giving feedback to somebody that works for you or even trying to manage up a little bit, it's important to have that circumstance, that time is close in mind so that people can think back about it and you don't have like that distortion of what occurred over time.
Right. Yeah. Feedback is such an interesting, can become a barrier in a lot of ways too for people. Like, and you're helping by giving some really good practical tips and giving feedback. And yet I feel like that's still like, it can be so hard for people to do because, let's just say, hey, are you open to some feedback? And they say, Yes, I am. Now it's like, ooh, and like you're saying, provide the context and really good examples so that it's not, and then the timeliness as well, which is also so critical. How do, for people that are maybe struggling, and I think that's a lot of us struggle with giving feedback effectively, we do want to be timely, but do you have a recommendation for like, how many examples you should have before you give feedback?
Oh, I think we all need to recognize that we're human. And I don't necessarily think, especially when you're trying to give feedback to somebody that you work for, I don't think it's probably wise to do it at the first occasion. But probably after the third time it happens, and when I was talking about timeliness, it would be like, so after the third time it happens, just saying, knock, knock into the office, hey, in the meeting that we just had. And then, and I've seen this happen before, and you may not even be aware of the impact that it has on me. It's not really about blaming them. It's about just saying, here's what happened when you act this way. Here's the impact that it has on other people. And so I think you need to couch it in true data and make sure it's not just, you woke up on the wrong side of the bed today or had a fight with your partner.
Well, and like you said, I mean, and it does require courage, and it requires maybe some thinking through, the feedback and how to provide that as well. And I guess that goes for not only for followers but for leaders as well, because my gosh, we're as leaders, and working with a bunch of CEOs, we can be horrendous with giving feedback.
Right. Well, and the reality is the best thing is for the leader to create a culture of saying, I want to get better as a leader. Managing people is, one of the most challenging things. Jack Welch, who of course was CEO of GE, a long time ago, but he always said the soft stuff's the hard stuff. And so managing people it is much more difficult than managing a process or ensuring quality and in operations. Not that those things are without their challenges, but people are always challenging. And so I think the leader can also set the culture and set the stage. And so I think it's important for them to solicit feedback, by just asking people, and maybe not publicly, but just sort of in a one-on-one situation, what's the one blind spot you think that, I have that I should be more aware of? Or, I kind of noticed that people shut down after the meeting, how does this particular blind spot show up when I approach things? And just asking for the feedback, because it's the easiest way to encourage this culture and continue to get feedback and have people have the courage to speak to you, is to ask for it. And then obviously when you ask for it, you don't want to shoot the messenger. You need to accept it as a gift and a perspective, and you can process it and believe in it or do whatever you want with it, but just go, okay, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that, telling me.
It is funny though how we internalize that. We attach judgment to it, right? I mean, you get feedback, and it's like they think that I'm terrible at my job. They don't think I can do this, right? It's like, is that true?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true.
It's wild. So let me ask you a question for maybe GMs who might be listening to this podcast who, inside their head, they're like, man, you know what? I'm not good at feedback. And sometimes I do think people are afraid of me. I mean, what is your advice for leaders who sense that they need to make a change in how they show up if they want to survive, not only, in their role, but for their organization that they're leading? How do they get started? What's an easy first step to start to understand that there's a better, more productive and constructive way?
Yeah, well, beyond asking for feedback and soliciting feedback and treating it as a gift, which we already talked about, I think you can do a little bit of managing by wandering around. And that just means increasing your time, not always in your office. So just broaden the people that you spend time with, more of your members, more of your employees, maybe even people outside of your industry that could offer you different perspectives on, how you can create more of an experience in the cloud, how you can be a better manager. So I think a little bit of managing by wandering around and being open to seeing the world differently or through other people's eyes would be one piece of advice. And that entails being a good listener. So I think that's another piece of advice. So, honestly, leaders who refuse to listen eventually are going to have followers who don't have anything to say to them, nothing significant. They're never going to say anything of importance. We talked about not shooting the messenger. So when you get your feedback, don't shoot the messenger. And I think there's an opportunity to just do an audit, just have some self-reflection and some awareness and think about where in the past you've made some mistakes or where you have sort of reoccurring issues occurring as you manage. And if you could start to spot patterns, you're probably going to get to some of your blind spots and see them for what they are. And I think if you surround yourself with peers or good friends or advisors or a peer advisory group, but if you have a group of people that you feel you can go to talk about, whether it's a coach or like I said, a group of peers or just a good friend, if you can go to people, not necessarily people that you work for, but just even other people, and just talk through those issues about your blind spots and just get their reaction to it, and people you can rely on to speak with you candidly and honestly, I think all of those steps will really help you open the door for your own growth and learning and really performance improvement in your people and in your club and your organization.
Yeah, it's really helpful. I mean, it can be really scary for people too. And sometimes as you're a facilitator in a professional CEO peer group. But what you've, in a lot of the GMs and as we know, the private club marketers are part of associations where they're with their peers and they can share experiences and learn other people's challenges. And what you always see is like, all of a sudden you go, wow, I'm not really that screwed up after all. Or I am screwed up just like all these other people, and that you're not alone, that you're not on an island. And my gosh, there's so many people who have, become more enlightened along the way and been able to modify their behavior as well, which is an awesome success story, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Do you have any recommendations for books, for tools that people could use, both maybe, for leaders and for followers that are trying to, the followers who are trying to become stars or better communicators, or for leaders who are trying to get a handle on their leadership style and their approach?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of tools around emotional intelligence, and there's a couple of assessments around that. So emotional intelligence is one thing I'd recommend. I think it's really important to understand your communication style and your approach and your thinking. And so sometimes there's a variety of personality tests or psychometrics that can help you understand yourself as well as your employees, whether that's a DISC analysis, a Myers-Briggs, a predictive index, or even culture index. Those tools, they all take a slightly different perspective, but they really help you understand your strengths and the strengths of people that are on your team. So I think doing some sort of assessment and keeping that in your vocabulary, keeping it alive is really important. I love Strength Finders as a book, as a tool. So those are just some tools that I'd recommend offhand.
That's awesome. Well, Sue, thanks so much for your wisdom and sharing your insight with us today. It's been so helpful, and I look forward to bumping into you again, hopefully at a PCMA conference or CMA conference or elsewhere.
Absolutely, would love that. So thanks for inviting me, Ed, and it was a really pleasure to speak with you today.
Awesome, thanks. And thank you for joining us. Conversations like that make you want to step it up as a leader, don't they? If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe to it on whatever platform you use to get your podcasts. And until next time, keep crushing your club marketing.